Hello everyone, welcome to the Lex.Journey. Last week we discussed the topic of offer. So this week we'll be going to acceptance as an element of a valid contract. So now, what is acceptance? What is acceptance? Acceptance is defined as the final and unqualified assent to the terms of an offer. Acceptance it must mirror the terms of the offer. When a thing is being accepted, it must correspond to the offer. This is also known as the mirror image rule. The mirror image rule. So, acceptance may be done by words, conduct, or in writing, right? So, authority for the principle that acceptance may be done by conduct is the case of Brogden versus Metropolitan Railway Company. So now the general rule is that acceptance must be communicated to the offeror before it becomes binding. And acceptance must be communicated to the offeror before it becomes binding. Authority for this principle is Entos Limited versus Miles Far East, where Lord Denning gave the analogy that, or the analog that if he shouts an offer to you over a river or in a courtyard and there's an aircraft moving, you can't shout the acceptance. If you want to accept, you have to wait till the aircraft moves away before you shout so that I can properly hear you accept the offer. This simply means that acceptance must be brought to the notice of the person making the offer before it becomes binding. And the case, as I said, is Entos Limited versus Miles Far East. So this requirement that acceptance must be communicated is the same justification for the reason why in law of contract it is said that silence cannot amount to acceptance. Silence cannot amount to acceptance. So in the case of Telthouse and Bindley, that's where the authority for this principle was established. This was also supported by the case of Leoninas D, where Gov J said it is an axiom that an offer cannot be accepted by silence or through silence, save exceptional circumstances. So there are certain exceptional circumstances where acceptance may be done by silence, but generally, please, silence cannot amount to acceptance. And I said the authority is Telthouse and Bindley and the Leoninas D. And also in the Ghanaian case of Degui versus Insia and Antonelli, the court held that there must be positive words or conduct through which acceptance may be inferred by the court. And secondly, acceptance must be communicated. So this is a Ghanaian case for the authority that acceptance must be what? Communicated. Degui versus Insia and Antonelli. So now, even though it is said acceptance must be communicated, it must be communicated through the right authority. It must be communicated through the right authority. And authority for this principle is, or the case which supports this principle is Powell versus Lee. Powell versus Lee, or Powell versus Lee. Please, this case involved a man who went for an interview to be a headmaster. The management decided to accept his offer, but one of those who interviewed him told the man that he had been accepted, but this communication was not authorized by the board. So when the matter went to court, the court said that that man who gave the information that Powell had been accepted as a head teacher had no authority to give it, so the acceptance was not binding. So even though acceptance must be communicated, it must be communicated through what? The right authority. Now, it is not compulsory that acceptance must be communicated by the offeree. It may be done by, yes, please. It must be communicated by the offeree, right? It must be communicated by the offeree. Now, we have certain modes of acceptance that we must all know. Modes of acceptance. So acceptance, the offeror, when he makes the offer, can prescribe the mode of acceptance. He has the right to prescribe the exact mode through which the offer may be accepted. So general rule, as a general rule, Acceptance must be done through the same manner as which the offeror prescribes. Any other mode would normally not be binding on the offeror. An authority for this principle is Eliason versus Henschel. Eliason versus Henschel. So in Eliason versus Henschel, the offeror prescribed that the offer must be accepted by a wagon. However, the offeree did not accept it by that way, and the court held that since the exact mode was not adhered to, the acceptance was not binding. Eliasson versus Henschel, authority for the principle that you must comply with the terms or the manner in which the offeror prescribes for acceptance. However, we must also note that if the offeror prescribes a particular mode, but not in terms, which makes it mandatory for you to accept in that mode, any other mode which is no less advantageous will suffice. For instance, I say I'm offering to sell you my mobile phone. I said I told you to accept it by return of post. By return of post. So, how I told you to do, I didn't say that by return of post only. So you can use any other means which is, say, more advantageous. Example, by a phone call, because it's even more speedier. It is more speedy. So yes, an authority for this principle is Tin versus Hoffman. Tin versus Hoffman. In the case of Manchester Diocesan Council of Education versus commercial investment. Manchester Diocesan Council versus commercial investment. So, in that case, the court held that if a mode is suggested but not made mandatory, a different mode that is no less advantageous may be valid. Very good. Now let's go to the postal rule. The postal rule. So we started from Entos Limited versus Miles Far East, and we said acceptance must be communicated to the offeror before it becomes binding and must be brought to its actual notice. Please, this principle relates to instantaneous means of communication. When the communication is instantaneous, as soon as I send the acceptance, it reaches you, then you must have notice of it first. So, however, the postal rule is not an instantaneous means of communication. So, if you are accepting an offer by the post, the rule is that acceptance is valid and effective upon posting, or the acceptance is valid when the letter properly addressed is posted, not when it is actually received by the offeror. An authority for this principle is Adam versus Lindsay. Adam versus Lindsay. So we have to know that even if the letter never reaches to the offeror, if the acceptance never reaches, it is still binding and effective. It is still effective. And this is a case involving one man called Hughes. The full case, Household Catch and Fire versus Hughes. So please, let's note that case also. So these are the general rules of acceptance that we must know. Now, let's learn about the battle of forms. The battle of forms. The battle of forms. Now, in modern or commercial transactions, parties normally use their own standard form contracts or their own printed forms to transact with everyone. So in these cases, when party A is contracting with party B, he has his own contract, which has the terms in which he's prepared to contract. When party B is accepting, he also accepts using his own standard forms, and sometimes they may be invariants. The terms may be invariants. Now the question is, on whose terms? On whose terms is the contract concluded? Is it the first person or the last person? Traditionally, the rule that governs battle of forms is called the last shot rule. The one who gives the last shot, that means the one who gives the last letter, is the one whose terms will be binding upon the parties. Whose terms will be binding upon the parties. So look at Excel, Excel, XLO cooperation. XLO Corporation. So, in Butler Machine 2 versus XLO Corporation, the court determined which party's standard terms apply when they conflict during negotiations. So, this is a case to support the battle of forms, which you must all note. Butler Machine 2 versus XLO Corporation. So this will be a general overview of acceptance, which you must all know. We started by defining acceptance as the final and unqualified expression of assent to the terms of an offer. And we said acceptance may be done by word, may be done by conduct. And we said authority for the principle that acceptance may be effected by conduct is Brogden versus Metropolitan Railway. We did the modes of acceptance. We said the offeror has the right to prescribe the mode of acceptance, and if he prescribed that only that mode be binding, any other mode will not be binding on him if used. An authority for the principles Eliasson versus Henshaw. And then we said, if, however, the offeror prescribes the particular mode, but not in terms, insisting that only that mode be binding on him, any other mode that is equally advantageous or even more advantageous will suffice or will be binding. And we cited the cases of Tin versus Hoffman and Manchester Diocesan Council of Education versus commercial investment. We went into the postal rule. That postal rule of acceptance states that acceptance is valid upon posting. Valid upon posting. We said the case is Adam versus Lensel. And then we said even if the acceptance, the letter of acceptance never reaches, it is still binding. On the postal rule, it is still binding even if the acceptance never reaches. And please take note of that also. And we said because of the fact that acceptance must be communicated to the offeror, silence cannot amount to acceptance. And the cases in support of this, Felders and Bindley, and the case of Leonidas D, where Gov LG stated that it is an axiom, it is well known that silence cannot amount to acceptance in contract law, save exceptional circumstances. So now this will be the general overview that we must all know about acceptance. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.